Welcome to Level 135, Music Theory. And this lesson will introduce you to the major chord scale. In other words, you're going to understand how chords fit together to make songs. You're also going to understand why certain chords don't sound good together. So we are beginning our first part of 3 parts, which will focus on traditional major keys, traditional minor keys, and then later on, when we get into blues, we're going to understand modern types of keys. And the reason I say that is because traditional, when I use traditional major or traditional minor in a sentence, what I'm saying is that type of harmony would have sounded good to ears 200 or 300 years ago, back in 1600. This type of harmony that we're going to talk about today, traditional major, would have sounded good in 16th century ears, as well as our ears. Now, blues harmony would not sound good in someone who lived in 1650. And that's because their ears haven't been exposed to the types of harmonies that we have today. So that's a difference. You wouldn't want to play jazz for someone in 1650. They would hate it. But you could play music from 1650 to someone today, and we would enjoy that music. And a great deal of our music is written using traditional major and traditional minor keys. So let's get started. So first things first, we need to make sure that your theory knowledge is up to speed. So make sure that you understand all the theory that you're looking at right now on this page. And that is, you should know how to construct major scales, you should know how to construct major chords, and you should know how to construct minor chords. You should be doing that on paper. You learned all that in Beginner 1. Because if you don't know how to do that, this level will make no sense to you. So this is heavily based upon prerequisite material. This is a very important theory level. This is probably the most important theory level you will have in this program, because it's introducing you to how chords fit together in harmony. So all that has to do with major scales, major chords, and minor chords. So get up to date on that, and we're going to go to the next step. So get out some paper and a pencil, and today's example will make use of the C major scale. So you want to write out the C major scale just like this: C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And you don't have to put down the other C. So we got a total of 7 letters: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And the C major scale, as you know, has no sharps and no flats. Next, we're going to construct the 1 chord. And in music, the 1 chord is usually the first and the last chord performed in a song. And it's oftentimes the most used chord of a song. It's what we call the key. So if our song is in key of C major, the 1 chord would be a C major chord. So let's go ahead and construct that. All you have to do is take the first, the third, and the 5th notes of the C major scale. And as you know from your theory, that's going to give you a C major chord. And so the notes are C, E, and G. That is a C major chord. And to call this a C major chord, numerically, we use the Roman numeral 1, and it's a capital Roman numeral. So that's very important. If it's a capital Roman numeral, it tells you that the chord is going to be major. If it's a lowercase Roman numeral, then the chord is minor. So that's just something you will want to memorize. So our 1 chord is the C major chord, and we get that by taking every other letter starting on C. Now that we've established C major as our key center, we need to find chords that will supplement the C major chord. So I don't know if you looked at a chord book lately, but there are hundreds of chords available. So how do we narrow it down to the chords that will work with C major? Well, we go to the source, the C major scale. So did you know that within the C major scale, there are other chords, and those chords will fit in key of C. So we're basically creating a menu of chords that work with the C major chord. So if we start on the D and we take every other letter, which are the notes D, F, and A, that's going to give us a chord. Now we don't know just yet if it's major or minor, but if we look at our cheat sheet, we can go to the D major scale, which are the notes D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. And if we take the first, the third, and the fifth, and flat the third, we get a D minor chord. So you've already done this in beginner 1. The notes D, F, and A are a D minor chord. And that's what we have in our example right here. So we're going to call this a D minor chord, and to show that it's minor, we will use a lowercase Roman numeral 2. And that's our 2 chord. And already you've got the ingredients for a song. You can go back and forth between C major and D minor, and those chords are going to sound pretty good together because they belong to the C major scale. But if you want more chords in your song, then you probably need to investigate a little further. So what we are going to do is construct the 3 chord, and that starts on the 3rd scale degree of the C major scale. So you take every other letter starting on E, and you get the notes E, G, and B. And then you stack them just like this, E, G, and B. And that's going to give you a chord. Now we don't know yet if it's major or minor. So what you do is you get out some paper and a pencil and you construct the E major scale. And the notes of the E major scale are E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. And if you take the first, the third, and the fifth, and you flat the third, you end up with an E minor chord, just like it says in this chart. It's not E, G sharp, B. That's not in our song. We have an E, G, B in our chord scale. So let's go back to that. And there they are. E, G, B is indeed an E minor chord. We just proved that. So we need to write minor up here. And since it is a minor chord, we use the Roman numeral 3. And it's a lowercase Roman numeral to designate the 3 chord. So now we got 3 chords that we can use to write a song. The 1 chord is major, the 2 chord is minor, and the 3 chord is minor. So experiment with that. And next we're going to move to the 4 chord. And the 4 chord is constructed off the 4th scale degree of the major scale. And in this case, it's an F. So starting on F, you're going to stack the letters F, A, and C. We're just taking every other letter, and that gives us the notes F, A, and C. Now we don't know yet if this is a major chord or a minor chord, but if we go back to our cheat sheet, or if you spell out an F major scale on paper and you take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th letters, you get an F major chord. So we've proven on this chart that the notes F, A, and C combine to give us an F major chord. And that's what we have here as our 4 chords. So we are going to call this major, and we're going to use a capital Roman numeral 4 since it is a major chord. So now we have 4 chords that we can use to write a song. We can use a C major chord with a D minor chord, an E minor chord, and an F major chord. So you've got some serious songwriting content now to work with. But I'm sure you want some more, so we're going to add some more chords to the list. And that brings us to our 5 chord. And to construct the 5 chord, we start on the 5th note of the major scale. And since we're in key of C, that note would be G. And so you just take every other letter starting on G, and those would be the notes G, B, and D. And so we stack them together just like that. And we don't know just yet if it's a major chord or a minor chord. So just as you did back in beginner 1, you construct a G major scale, and if you take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of the G major scale, you get a G major chord. So this chart proves that the notes G, B, and D are indeed a G major chord. And that's what we got here. So what we want to do is we want to use an uppercase Roman numeral 5 to show that this chord is indeed a major chord. And all of a sudden, we have 5 chords that we can use in songwriting in key of C. And those would be the C major chord, the D minor chord, the E minor chord, the F major chord, and the G major chord. So you can get out your guitar and experiment playing along those chords, making C your primary chord, and I think you will realize that there's a lot of songwriting material right there waiting for you. But we have more, and so we're going to begin work on the sixth chord. And based on what we've already done, you probably already know what's coming next. To construct the sixth chord, we take every other letter starting on the sixth scale degree of the major scale. And since we're in key of C, that would start on A. We take every other letter, which are the notes A, C, and E. And those three letters combine to give us a chord. And if we look at our trusty cheat sheet, we can see that the letters A, C, and E are indeed in the minor column. So our sixth chord is a minor chord, and to show that, we use a lowercase Roman numeral 6. And now we have 6 chords available for songwriting: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, and A minor. But we do have one other chord. It's the mystery B. Is it major? Is it minor? Or is it something else? Well, that's what's coming next. Let's have a look. To construct the seventh chord, we take every other letter starting on the 7th scale degree of the major scale. And since we are in key of C, that note would be the B. So if we take every other letter, we get the letters B, D, and F. So all we have to do is decide if this chord is major, minor, or something else. Let's have a look at our cheat sheet. If we were to take the notes B, D sharp, and F sharp, we would have a B major chord. But that's not the case. And if we take a B minor chord, those would be the notes B, D, and F sharp. Well, the problem is our song or our chord scale has no sharps in it. It's just B, D, and F. So it looks like we've canceled the sharps on the 3rd and the 5th. In other words, we've lowered the 3rd scale degree and the 5th scale degree. And when you do that, you end up with a diminished chord. A B diminished chord is when you take the 1st, the flatted 3rd, and the flatted 5th. And we show that on the chart with a lowercase 7 and this circle here to show that the chord is diminished. So we have a root, a flatted 3rd, and a flatted 5th. It's kind of a creepy sounding chord, but if you put it in just the right spot, it's a really cool chord in certain situations. But for most of you songwriters, you're going to be hanging out in the 1 through 6 chord range. And those of you who want to experiment, try implementing a B diminished chord into the mix. But every chord that you're looking at on this chart belongs to the C major scale. When you play chords that belong to the same scale, you're going to get stability. Anytime you add chords that don't belong to the scale, for instance, if you were to play a G sharp major chord, you're going to get instability. So this is kind of a roadmap to get you the most stable type of sound. And once again, since we are in traditional major, this would have sounded good in 16th century ears because this is where all that was developed. This chart is a visual representation of everything that you just did on paper. So we took those 7 chords of the C major chord scale and we applied them to the diagrams. And so we have 7 diagrams representing the 7 chords of the chord scale. The 1 chord being the C major chord, 2 chord D minor, 3 chord E minor, 4 chord F major, 5 chord G major, 6 chord A minor, and the 7 chord B diminished. The circles of each diagram represent the notes of the C major scale, which are the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. No sharps, no flats. The green blobs represent the notes of the chords contained within that C major scale. And so we just covered all those. Our 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, and 7 chords are all self-contained within the scales. And you can see that. Here's the green blobs, which make up your C major chord. These are shapes that you already know or have already studied at levels for guitar. And you can see that the 2 chord is minor. There's your D minor shape. And all those notes indeed belong to the C major scale. The 3 chord, there's your E minor chord. You can clearly see that those green blobs are all placed inside of that C major scale. And so that's what I'm trying to get you to do, is to see that these chords are all self-contained within the C major scale. Now for practice, you can try creating your own song. So you can start with a 1 chord, and for example, you can go to a 3 chord, and then back to a 2 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. So you can play C, E, and D, and you don't have to be rhythmic or anything, just practice listening to the chord changes. You will find that those 3 chords sound pretty good together. You can also make up a song using, a C major chord to an F major chord. You can go back to the C chord and then up to a G chord. The main thing is you want to make C as your primary chord, so you have to keep coming back to it every now and then to reestablish the key center. Now for those of you who want to experiment, you can include the B diminished chord in your songwriting. However, most songwriters stay away from it because it is kind of a taboo chord, so unless you know how to really use it, it can sound kind of out of place. Most songwriters will stick between the 1 chord and the 6 chord when writing in a major key. Now, speaking of keys, not every song is written in key of C major. If you can memorize the chord scale as it's listed here, 1 chord major, 2 chord minor, 3 chord minor, 4 chord major, 5 chord major, 6 chord minor, and 7 chord diminished, if you memorize that order, then all you have to do is apply it to any key that you want to write in. So let's take the G major scale, for example. That is the most commonly written key for the guitar. And so we can just take the order of the chord scale and apply it to our G major scale. And when you do that, you get a G major as our 1 chord, A minor as the 2 chord, B minor as the 3 chord, C major as the 4 chord, D major as the 5 chord, E minor as the 6 chord, and an F sharp diminished as the 7 chord. That same order of chords applies to any key that you want to write in. If you want to write a song in key of E major, you can use an E major, F sharp minor, G sharp minor, A major, B major, C sharp minor, and D sharp diminished. So it's important to memorize the quality of each chord in the chord scale. A quick trick I like to use is I memorize the major chords as 1, 4, and 5, the minor chords as 2, 3, and 6, and the 7 chord as diminished. Once again, 1, 4, and 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and the 7 chord is diminished. And once you have them memorized, you can apply it to any key that you want to write songs in.